Right. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for coming to the Island of Ideas public talk series. Tonight, we are discussing the cat catastrophe, pet or pest. Love a good alliteration. My name's Tiana. I'm going to be your MC tonight, and I do come with qualifications for this talk. I've been involved in invasive species management, research for many years. And I started because I love horses. And I grew up in a place where we had a lot of feral horses around, and I really wanted to ensure that feral horses were managed in a humane and effective way. And not just to protect the biodiversity that is sometimes harmed when feral horse numbers get too high, but also to ensure that we're treating the feral animals with care and respect. Because often we take some very drastic measures to manage their numbers, and it's really important that those are justified and they will work in the way we think, because otherwise we're just killing animals for the sake of killing animals, and that's a big problem. So I've been involved with some feral horse management here in the US and here in Australia. I moved here to do a PhD in horses, because I love horses. And now I work part-time at the Invasive Species Council, advocating for science-based invasive species management and policy in species like feral deer and cats, which is what brings us here tonight. But before we get started, I'll just take a moment to acknowledge that tonight we are gathered in Lutruwita, Tasmania, on Aboriginal land, sea, and waterways to discuss the impacts and challenges that stem from invasive species that have been introduced to the island. As we go forward tonight, we reflect on the deep history of this island and those who have cared for this place long before any of us arrived. In recognition of this history, the University of Tasmania acknowledges the Muanina and Palawa people who deliberately and skillfully cared for the lands of Nipaluna Hobart long before colonization and before any of our furry feline friends were here. We pay our respects to community members in the room with us tonight, elders past, present, and emerging, those who were forcibly removed from their homes or did not make elder status. We stand for a future that respects and acknowledges Aboriginal perspectives, cultures, language, and history. So why are we here tonight? Well, Tasmania has some really spectacular and unique plants and animals that are found nowhere else on Earth. And because we are this small little island at the bottom of a bigger island, a lot of our plants and animals evolved in isolation from the rest of the world, and this means that a lot of our species are more susceptible to some of the harmful impacts from invasive species, and that includes feral cats. Invasive species are one of the leading causes of extinction and decline in Australia, and feral cats alone have caused 27 Australian native animals to go extinct and threatening many more across the country. Here in Tasmania, we have about 50 native species that are threatened by feral cats, including 15 already threatened species. And it's not just feral cats. Unfortunately, our pet cats roaming around can also cause significant harm to our wildlife populations. So it's all very doom and gloom, but there is good news. Because we are a small island at the bottom of a big island, and we have lots of offshore islands, we actually have some really great opportunities to effectively manage cats to protect our wildlife into the future. And we'll hear some of these opportunities later, and they're not just good for wildlife, but they're also good for our pet cats to have healthy, happy, longer lives. So what can we do about feral cats and pet cats eating through all of our wildlife? Well, unfortunately, managing cats comes with a lot of challenges, and it's not without its controversies. But to come up with solutions to pressing issues like cat management, it's really important that we have safe spaces to participate in informed debates, collectively discuss and manage issues. And that's why programs like the University of Tasmania's Island of Ideas program is so important. So tonight we have 3 experts here to help us navigate the cat catastrophe. And to kick off, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Alex Patton. So Alex is an invasive species ecologist and a phenomenal science communicator, for those of you who don't know. She's a PhD student at the university here, and she's tracking feral cats in Tasmania using camera traps. She's collecting some really vital information about where feral cats are, how they move through the landscape to help inform how we can better manage them. So please welcome Alex.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Tiana. So, as Tiana said, I'm a PhD candidate here at the University of Tasmania, and I've spent the last 4 years of my life researching feral cats. Where are they? How can we track them better? What are their impacts and what can we do? So, within this, I think I should let you all know, we are at war. If you weren't aware, we are at war with feral cats. Yes, our glorious leader, Tanya Plibersek, Environmental Minister, declared this war last year in 2023. We have a new plan to eradicate feral cats, or to at least tackle this problem in some way. But for some of you, this might sound a little bit familiar, because indeed we've been at war with feral cats before. In 2015, we also had a feral cat abatement plan, but clearly we didn't win because we're here today. So what went wrong? Where did feral cats come from, and why are they still a pest within Australia and definitely within Tasmania? I mean, as Tiana said, we're an island, so surely we have a better chance of eradication than the rest of Australia, right? So to get started, let's define what we actually mean by feral cat. I have a lot of people who email me and let me know that they've seen feral cats in their area, and sometimes I have to let them know that, the cats that you're seeing under your neighbour's car might actually just be your neighbour's cats. So when we're talking about feral cats, we also have to consider stray cats and domestic cats. One of the issues we have barring us towards effective feral cat management is there's no unified definition for what constitutes a feral across Australia. Western Australia is pushing for this legislation to be updated so we can actually have proper action taken and we know which cats we're targeting. But for now, this is what we have. Our domestic cats are our cats that live at home with us. They rely on us for food, for shelter, for love and for cuddles. They're the cats that you're seeing in your neighbour's yard. Then we have our stray cats. They rely on people for at least some of their needs. Maybe a bit of food at the tip, or maybe in the offal pits of a farm, or maybe potentially they're using it for shelter as well, and you're finding them in suburban areas. These cats know who humans are, and they can generally be rehabilitated by wonderful organisations like 10 Lives. Our feral cats, on the other hand, are completely wild, and trying to take one home would be the equivalent of trying to take a devil into your lounge room. They are terrified of humans, they don't know what we are, and there's really not a lot of hope for taking one home unless you get it under 8 weeks old, which my office mate actually did once with a bug nest and caught one out in the wild. It's very cool. So with these feral cats, how did they actually get across Tasmania? Through my research of over 600 camera traps, that's to say wildlife cameras, they take photos of animals using movement and heat, deployed across Tasmania for over 4 years, I can confidently say they're everywhere. From the furthest reaches of the southwest of Tasmania all the way up to the beaches of Bicheno, we've got feral cats. Because they came with European colonisation, and they established their own wild populations that are independent now of humans entirely. So it's a big problem. Why are they a problem? Why do we care so much? Most of you have probably heard about the parasite, toxoplasmosis. It has a complex life cycle between cats and humans and sheep. This parasite costs the agricultural and the health industry a combined total of around $8 billion every year in Australia. Yeah, it causes miscarriages in sheep in the early stages of pregnancy and can cause complications in human pregnancy as well. It's one of the reasons we need to push for cat containment. Your cat might not be eating the neighbour's birds, but if it's pooping in the veggie patch, well, we don't know what damage that's going to do. More obviously, our feral cats, I'm going to have to go one back. More obviously, our feral cats have direct impacts on wildlife through predation. So these are photos from our camera trap network taken by Barry Brook and Jesse Butel here at the university. You can see here that they target basically anything that they can carry. The largest animal we've seen taken in Tasmania by a feral cat was a 5-kilo paddy melon, and that was captured on camera. You'll see as well, sometimes they specialise in more complicated prey. In the top left-hand corner, you can see a feral cat carrying a tiger snake, and she was actually captured a further 3 times with different tiger snakes on different days. So with this predation, as Tiana mentioned, feral cats have contributed to the extinction of more than 26 animals within Australia, including 22 mammal species. But none of these extinctions have occurred in Tasmania. We've had the extinction of the thylacine, but we haven't lost any mammals yet, although feral cats do pose to threaten many, many more of our wildlife species. So why isn't more being done to tackle this problem? What are our options for controlling feral cats? My brother actually messaged me when he heard I was doing this talk, and he said, all you need to do is put a bounty on them, and then you'd be all right. I don't know if anyone here shoots, but I'll tell you, if you can shoot a cat at 100 metres with a rifle in a Tasmanian rainforest, I will quit my job. So the obvious option is shooting, and that's the approach we took on Macquarie Island and on many other island eradications, but it's not necessarily feasible at a large scale due to the massive problem of immigration. You might remove one cat, but they are territorial, so you're actually just opening up territory, and unless you can consistently keep that pressure on the population and prevent more cats from coming in, well, you might be doing more harm than good. This is what Billy Lazenby found during her thesis here at the University of Tasmania. She saw that low-level culling on feral cats didn't actually reduce their impact on wildlife. In fact, it temporarily increased the activity of feral cats, and then we just watched it go back to a gradual base level of activity. So that doesn't look great. What about cage trapping? That's a little bit easier, right? Well, if you have done cage trapping on your property, you might be familiar with the fact that possums really, really love food, and so do devils, and so do quolls. So your chance for bycatch is so high. So you need to be trapping for maybe 100,000 nights before you get a single feral cat. And the ethical concerns around our native species who are inadvertently being trapped is just so high. And again, the cost associated is massive. That's a bit of a bummer. Well, what else do we have? Well, we do have baiting. And that's pretty effective in island eradication, poison baits, and they're getting more and more specific to feral cats every day. But again, who likes to eat carrion and scavenge? Well, our devils and quolls. And we are so lucky in Tasmania that we have native carnivorous marsupials, but again, it knocks out another option for control. Okay. Good news is, great minds across Australia are working on new and novel approaches to feral cat eradication. One such approach is the Felixer, which you can see pictured in the bottom right. This is essentially a cat-killing robot. It's far out, but just stick with me. It has an inbuilt camera and lasers that can sense when a cat walks past the machine. And it can tell if this animal is a cat or not a cat. It takes a photo, and if the cat's moving at an appropriate speed, it pushes out a jet of poison onto the animal. Then this animal, mostly a cat, has to be a meticulous enough groomer to lick off all of that poison and then subsequently die. And we've had massive success with its use on Three Hummock Island in Tasmania's northwest. So it's showing a lot of promise, but it's still in development and obviously isn't necessarily effective over a large scale, at least not at this stage. There's one other bit of control that we do have in development as well, which I just think is really cool, but not necessarily practical. Have any of you heard of rewilding programs? You know, where you re-release animals to the environment that might have gone extinct? Big issue with cats. You know, you release one of these animals into the environment, you try to reintroduce a population, and there's been many cases where feral cats have prevented that from happening by eating all of those animals. They're very, what we call predator naive. They're not good at registering cats as a threat, and that makes them prime prey for dinner. Catherine Moseby and her team out at Arid Recovery in South Australia have developed something called a population protecting implant, which essentially turns our native species into Trojan horses. It's like a little microchip of poison that they inject under the skin of the animals they're releasing, and then sure enough, if unfortunately the animal gets eaten, at least it takes down the cat with it. So there's some success there, but maybe not something we can use at a large scale in Tasmania. So that's all a little bit of a bummer. So what can we actually do? And I'm really sorry to have come up on the stage and been like, hey, you know this ecological disaster? We don't have a big solution yet. But we're working on it. Technology is constantly in development, and we're getting a better and better idea of where we need to be targeting control of feral cats. And that's exactly what the new Feral Cat Threat Abatement Plan is sort of aiming to do. Targeted, scientifically informed control. And it's where we need to pivot our focus. Yeah, feral cats have a big impact on our wildlife, but we need to use our money as effectively as we can to protect our native wildlife. And there's something we can do immediately close to home. And that's control our domestic cats. And Noel's going to tell us more about that today. If you think about it, one feral cat might occupy, say, a square kilometre of wilderness, and it's fighting tooth and nail. It's territorial, it's catching its own food, it's a rough life. In contrast, Bella and Charlie, the neighbours' cats, might be living very happy and comfortable lives, and they might roam outside. Oh, and in the same square kilometre, there might be another 10 cats, or even 15. Bella and Charlie will probably only eat a quarter of the native animals in their life that our feral cat will. But there's only one feral cat in that square kilometre. And there might be 20, 30 domestic cats in our 1 square kilometre of suburban area. That's where Sarah Legg found in her paper, We Need to Worry About Bella and Charlie, that our domestic cats, for an equivalent square kilometre of area, will have 28 to 52 times the impact on our wildlife. And this is something we can push for policy change now. This is something where we can be having limits on the number of pet cats people can own, stopping cat hoarders, or even better, keeping cats inside. On the other side, yep, Tasmania's 80 square kilometres of land, and we can't prevent re-immigration of cats from certain pockets of culling. But we do have so many offshore islands, just like Tiana mentioned, and we can eradicate cats from these areas and create safe havens for our native wildlife. Maybe even do reintroductions and rewilding programs. So there's a lot of hope there. And Kat's going to tell us, or Catherine, is going to tell us more about that in her talk. So there is hope for the future. We just need to pivot our focus. So I hope that you will enjoy the talks we have coming up tonight, and we can all work together to have a positive impact on this catastrophe. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. That was fantastic. You hit the nail on the head there. We're going to hear, as Alex pointed out, a little bit more of what everyone in the community can do to help this cat catastrophe. And we have Noel Hunt next. He is the CEO of 10 Lives Cat Centre, which is the largest dedicated cat shelter in Tasmania. And they also do a bunch of other phenomenal, really fantastic work. So under Noel's leadership, 10 Lives have started several very innovative programs to support cat welfare across the state. This includes the Richmond Project, which uses community engagement and camera surveys to manage and reduce stray cats and feral cat populations around the state. They've also got Meow Meals, a feline food assistant program to support cat parents who are facing financial hardship. So please welcome Noel as he tells us a bit more about how we can create a safe Tasmania for wildlife and our pet cats.
Thanks, Tiana. And Alex, that was fantastic. Well done. Some great thoughts there, I thought. So CEO, my daughter told me earlier on that meant I was the cat executive officer. And when the good folks here organising this said to me, oh, we need somebody to come along that's a bit positive about cats, I thought, okay, I might leave the car running at the door at the back and see how we go. The value of having a pet cat, I think, is quite clear, or having any sort of pet, and we have plenty of examples of that. Families have pets and the children love that, and it's great responsibility for the kids to be involved. We're hopefully going to announce a project with one of the prisons where the cats will be in the prison, and early work that we've done prior to hopefully launching that project has shown that the prisoners having something to get up in the morning to do rather than be made to get up, and something that they can do that causes to care for something really is showing some great results. As it turned out, the people working in the prison liked sneaking down at lunchtime to have a bit of a stay, and it was good for their help. Another example of where cat ownership is a great thing, we have a program at 10 Lives that we got from Queensland called Happy Paws, Happy Hearts. And a lot of people have trouble being included in the community and struggle just to be involved in anything. So this allows people that might need that just a little bit of extra help to be involved in something, and perhaps they come with a carer, where they can come to 10 Lives and learn something with a professional instructor that's very qualified at doing this, help them to learn something that they can then go out and put into action within the shelter with the cats, and then go back and refresh it. It's great for us because we're a community organisation that needs support of the community, so it's very important to us that we're a good part of that community. And having people involved and seeing these often young folks that could hardly bring themselves to talk, hardly bring themselves to look at you, really come out of the shell by being involved in a project like that is absolutely fantastic. So if you know anyone in that circumstances, have a look at Happy Paws, Happy Hearts from the internet. It's a fantastic project. We also see that cats are great for the elderly, great companion. So I think there's lots of reasons to say that a cat as a pet is a fantastic thing, but we do agree that we've got a bit of responsibility that comes with that, and we'll talk more about that. 10 Lives, we've been around for 70 years, and we were founded by Joan Allport, and that's the Allport family, with the Allport Library, for example, for those that are local. We're very much volunteer-based. We have about 450 volunteers that help us do what we do, plus a professional team, including vets and operational experts. And it costs us about $1.8 million to do what we do. We're self-funded. We don't receive any funding, even though we are a cat management facility under the Cat Management Act. So $1.8 million is a hell of a lot of raffle tickets. So sometimes people say, well, 10 Lives, you could be doing some more. We'd love to do some more, but we've got to address the funding challenge. It's great to see that local government thinking this year that they might help us a little bit, and every little bit will help. So we're a little bit different at 10 Lives, that we care very much about cats, but we care about the community, we care about the environment as well. And John Elkington in the 90s come up with the term the triple bottom line, and Shell Oil Company made it quite famous when they were trying to convince us all that the Shell Oil Company cared more than just profit for the shareholders, and they had a triple bottom line called profit, people and the planet. Well, 10 Lives also have a triple bottom line, but ours is people, the planet and pussycats. So we really do a lot of work to make sure that there is responsible cat ownership. To give you an idea, 30% of what comes into us is surrendered by their owners. That might be people that are homeless, that might be people that are ill, that might be people with financial problems. Alex mentioned cat hoarding. Cat hoarding is a massive problem. I hope none of the people listening to this have had personal experience with cat hoarding, but if you have seen some of those television programs where people have really ruined their lives and their houses and difficulties with the families because they've hoarded so much gear, well, often what comes with that sort of hoarding is hoarding of cats. And we see that only too often. In recent times, in a suburb very close to us here, we took 40 cats into our care. The house was covered in 6 inches of cat poo from one end to the other, plus all the other junk. There was another one of the same, and I've personally worked on one in a suburb of Hobart where there were 200 cats on the one property. And they're very challenging to deal with for us, because it's not so bad for us to deal with the cats, but we do need a lot of help dealing with the reasons why people have got themselves into that position in the first place. And these are things that I think that we can work on to help solve those problems. Because you can imagine that place with 200 cats, it was in a peri-urban area, and the figures that Alex mentioned, I concur, that would probably doing some quick maths, be about 250,000 animals, lizards, birds that would be killed each year just in that single case. So it's pretty terrifying. We have 40% of the cats come into us are lost, unwanted litters, unplanned litters. People forget that kittens can have kittens. So there's the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and yes, we are going to get that kitten desexed. At 4 months old, it can get pregnant. 63 to 65 days later, you've got some more kittens. So it's really quite an issue. And when you consider that over 60% of what comes into our care at 10 Lives are not desexed, we've still got a lot of work to do with the basics. In terms of the cats that come into our care, less than 3% find their original home. And that's because microchipping is not done as extensively as it should be. I do accept that the area in which 10 Lives works in is the difficult area. You might ask a vet working in a suburb and they say, no, all the cats are desexed and they're all microchipped. No, they're not the ones that we see, so we have to work on that. However, I tend quite a few things, and where we're talking about cat management facilities and shelters and the work that we do, and often somebody will stand up and say, well, we've been doing the same thing for the last several decades and it's not making any difference. Well, not in Tasmania. We haven't been doing the same things for the last several decades. In the last decade, we've actually started to make some progress. And listening to Alex and what Alex is personally doing and some of her colleagues is a good example that we are on the path. And I think an important time was when the government decided to review the Cat Management Act of 2009, enacted in 2012, and all levels of government and organisations like 10 Lives, the Land Conservancy Trust, the Conservation Trust, the universities, local government, you name it, were all at the table talking about the new Cat Management Act. And it was a very positive start. And then you started to see very progressive councils like Kingborough Council. I know this is a bit local for you watching online, but they really put some effort in to doing some work. And out of that came the famous Bruny Island Cat Management Project. And Cat, see what I did there, Cat is going to talk about that in detail, and I'm certainly not going to steal her thunder on the fantastic work that Cat and NRM South have done. But I would say that when Gregory Andrews, who was the first Threatened Species Commissioner, came to Tasmania and said, we're going to have an eradication program of cats on Bruny Island, and there will be the last cat on Bruny, including pet cats. And the success of that project, as far as Gregory was concerned, and he's a top fellow and a very clever bloke, but the success was going to be measured on how high the pile of dead feral cats were. And flashbacks again from what Alex said, I could just imagine the utes zooming around at midnight with their spotlights attempting to shoot feral cats. So I think that we influenced that project quite well. A lot of other people would quite rightly claim that they influenced that project quite well, but hey, I've got the microphone and I'm talking now. So my spin is that I said to Gregory, okay, that's fine, eradication, last cat on Bruny. How many cats are there on Bruny? Don't know. Where are they? Don't know. How many ferals? Don't know. How many domestic? How many strays? Don't know, don't know, don't know. Where do they fit into the food chain? Don't know. So we said, well, wouldn't it be better that we had a research-based project that identified high conservation values and worked on tackling those things and getting some real solid data so that we get a repeatable model from Bruny Island on what to do. And there were some fantastic things about that, and NRM South and Cat have continued those things on, and she will talk about that, no doubt. But the broad involvement of the community, I think, was a standout. All the businesses were involved, all the conservation organisations were involved. UTAS was extensively involved in some very well-known names and researchers from UTAS that were involved. And the 10 Lives were certainly involved, the state government and local government was involved, and so it went on. And that collaboration and work, I think, was quite a milestone in the progress that we've made in Tasmania. There are other projects that 10 Lives have got involved in from those learnings. Bruny Beach and Blackmans Bay Beach, Kingborough Council were keen to protect the penguin rookery down there, and the learnings from Bruny were invaluable. It was mentioned in the intro that 10 Lives decided that we would tackle a problem at Richmond, and there was all sorts of cat owners in Richmond, problems with the cats hanging around the jail, and we took the same approach and holistically approached the problem, consulted with the community, camera trap exercises to see where the cats really were, and then to work out some strategies on how to deal with it. And that has been very successful. More recently, with some contribution from Sorell Council and Tassie Cat, which is the state government funded cat management coordinators in the state, we've got a project at Midway Point. And many people would know that Midway Point is next to Orielton Lagoon, which is an important Ramsar site, which I'm sure you all know means that it has very important environmental values. And it's a place where the migratory birds stop off. So it's not a really clever plan to have the migratory birds stopping off from Russia and stray cats killing them while they're stopping. So now that we've got that data and we've researched the community to see what they think, we can now start putting some actions in place. And hopefully, I'm on TV at the moment on the local news with the Mayor of Sorell Council announcing that free desexing program will be started in Midway Point as of tonight. And with these sorts of actions, hopefully we can improve things. 10 Lives developed a program called EduCat. Yes, we did think of that all by ourselves. It's an education program that we're running. It isn't Cat Show and Tell. All the linkages to the Australian curriculum are done. It's very cleverly embeds STEM challenges. So prior to COVID, it was a big thing for schools to take the STEM challenge so that the kids would be encouraged to take up those sorts of disciplines, the science and the technology disciplines. And it's really fantastic. In grade 3, the kids are designing a cat enclosure. Unwittingly, they're actually learning the basic engineering process. So the teachers love it, the educators love it because it's valuable in meeting the Australian curriculum. The kids love it because it's about cats, and we love it, and we hope you love it because it's promoting responsible cat ownership of desexing your cat, microchip your cat, and containing your cat on your property. And with those sorts of things, I think we will progress. The state government and local government for a long time have pushed the funding ball on cat management back and forwards between the two of them. If I take an example of a very large council in our area, it was costing them $2 million a year for dog control. And they're thinking, if we take on the pussycats, there's going to be another $2 million. This is very expensive. Surely it must be somebody else's problem. But because of all the work that we've all been collectively doing, we're now actually all meeting, and there is a cat management plan for the state. It's being redeveloped as we spoke, so as we speak. And I'm very confident that we are starting to see some things that are going to make a difference. Because as I say, at 10 Lives, we love cats, but we love them to be in the right place. And out in the bush, killing the wildlife is not the right place. So we hope that we can get to a point very soon where everybody enjoys cats. That's our aim. So you might enjoy a cat because you love your pet cat. You might enjoy a cat because your neighbour's cat isn't coming over to your garden anymore and scratching around and causing a problem. Or you might love cats because they're not out in the bush killing the wildlife. With the work that's being done in Tassie, we're not just sitting on our hands. 10 Lives, what UTAS is doing, what CAT's doing, what the department and local government are doing, I am very positive that we're pointed in a direction to get some great outcomes. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Noel. That was really great. I love a win-win, and keeping your pet cats inside is safe for wildlife, safe for your cats. I believe pet cats live about 10 years longer when you keep them inside because they don't get diseases, they don't get eaten by other things, they don't get run over. So it's a win-win for everyone. And last but certainly not least, we have Dr. Catherine Young, or also known as Cat, just to make things really confusing for everyone. She works at NRM South as the Biodiversity Program Coordinator, and she's doing a lot of really, really great work on Bruny Island, which is, I believe, one of two of our terrestrial biodiversity hotspots, so really, really important work. She has extensive experience researching and working with Tasmania's threatened fauna, and while she has a broad interest in conservation and ecology, she really loves birds and their breeding habits, which would make for a whole nother interesting talk because bird mating is wild and fascinating, that I'm sure Kat will tell you about it another time. But she also does a lot of work addressing the impacts of feral, stray, and domestic cats on Bruny Island. So please welcome Kat.
Thanks, Tiana, and thanks so much, Alex and Noel, for those insightful presentations. I'm going to be using Bruny Island tonight to give you a little bit of an insight into what some of these things that Alex and Noel have been talking about might look like on the ground in a cat management program. So just quickly before I get into it, you might be wondering, who is NRM South? So NRM stands for Natural Resource Management. We are a not-for-profit organisation, one of 54 NRMs in Australia and one of 3 in Tasmania. So our region is the southeast of Tasmania. This covers 12 council areas and, amongst other things, contains 4 Ramsar wetlands and, at last count, 689 listed plant and animal species. I sit within the biodiversity team, where we manage a number of conservation-focused projects, including what I'm here to talk to you about today. So the project is officially called Priority Actions for Eastern Quolls on Bruny Island, and it was funded by the Australian Government through the National Land Care Program. The project centred around cat management and ran from 2020 to 2023. Cat management, however, really began on Bruny around 2016 with the Canberra Council's project, which is also federally funded. And collectively, the 2 projects have removed over 240 feral and stray cats from Bruny Island. Bruny Island is located off the coast south of Hobart. It's really 2 land masses connected by a narrow sandy isthmus, which we call the Neck. So I'll be referring to those land masses as North and South Bruny Island. Together, they cover 362 square kilometres. So essentially, Bruny Island is an island off an island off an island off an island at the bottom of the world. So why are we interested in Bruny Island? So Bruny is one of 20 priority places named by the federal government in the Threatened Species Strategy. It is a world-class nature-based tourism destination. It has amazing bird life and a relatively intact mammalian fauna, including a number of small mammals and those in the critical weight range. And this critical weight range is those that are vulnerable to predation by introduced predators. The stars of the show on Bruny Island are definitely the eastern quolls. These charismatic dasyurids are now extinct in the wild on mainland Australia. And Bruny Island is really their stronghold. On Bruny, we can also find all 12 endemic bird species, as well as the full spectrum of nocturnal birds, and little penguins and short-tailed shearwaters. When conditions are right, the island is a haven for the critically endangered swift parrot, as well as a number of other migratory bird species. The island is also home to feral cats, house mice, black rats, and fallow deer, as well as around 900 human residents, and also holiday homes, or as we in Tassie say, shacks. Although Australia and New Zealand are arguably world leaders in feral animal eradication and control, especially on islands, it is never easy or straightforward, and inhabited islands pose a unique set of challenges. As we have already heard tonight, cats are excellent predators. And on Bruny, they're a particular risk for species such as eastern quolls and ground nesting birds like hooded plovers and short-tailed shearwaters. There is also a thriving sheep industry on Bruny, which is vulnerable to parasites carried by cats, as Alex has already mentioned. So this project has a large cast of amazing project partners. Without any one of these organisations and the individuals within them, such as Noel, this project would not have been anywhere near as successful as it has been. So no particular order. Kingborough Council, 10 Lives Cat Centre, Biosecurity Tasmania, Tasmanian Parks and Wildlife Services, Bruny Enviro Ag Services, Weedapuna Aboriginal Corporation, and the South East Tasmania Aboriginal Corporation, or CTAC for short. In particular, their land management team. We've also had amazing support from another number of other organisations, including the Bruny Island Environmental Network, the Bruny Island Men's Shed, the University of Tasmania, and the Tasmanian Land Conservancy, as well as, of course, innumerable private landholders. As I mentioned, Bruny Island Cat Management really began in 2016. NRM South took on the project in 2020, and I started with NRM South in 2022. Keeping this in mind, for the next 7 minutes or so, when I say we did something amazing, I really mean mostly not me. So within our Bruny Island project, we had 3 main pillars: domestic, stray, and feral cats. We also delved into research on new and emerging technologies to control cats and had a large component dedicated to community engagement. With Kingborough Council, the project was also able to support an Indigenous ranger with CTAC. Nicole King successfully completed her Certificate 3 in Conservation and Land Management, assisted Bruny Island Enviro Ag Services with cat trapping, and continues to work part-time with both Kingborough Council and CTAC. To date, cat management on Bruny Island has primarily focused on North Bruny. And this area was identified through a multi-criteria analysis as the area with most biodiversity assets likely to benefit from cat control. The project was also extended to the northern part of South Bruny, where stray cats from hotspots in the south are able to filter across the neck and onto North Bruny. The neck area is generally very attractive for cats. It has a large seabird rookery. Each year, thousands of short-tailed shearwaters and little penguins nest there. And pre-control, this area was recorded as having some of the highest densities of feral cats in Tasmania. One aspect that has really made this project work has been the implementation of the Bruny Island Cat Bylaw 2018. The bylaw includes compulsory registration, desexing and microchipping, keeping cats on an owner's property, a limit of 2 cats per household without a permit, a prohibition on feeding cats. Management of the bylaw is done by Kingborough Council, and I cannot stress enough how many phone calls, letters, emails, house visits, cattery constructions, and one-on-one negotiations have gone into implementing and maintaining a high level of compliance with the bylaw. In the first few years of the project, a number of domestic cats were caught in cage traps and on cameras, and this declined very quickly as cat owners implemented strategies to keep their felines on their properties. To help with this, the council provided assistance with materials for building catteries, and the Bruny Island Men's Shed donated their time and their tools to help build them. Bylaw compliance now generally hovers around 80%, and we have learned through this project that that is an excellent number. 100% compliance is unrealistic, and there are a number of complicated issues that feed into this, some of which Noel has mentioned. The number of domestic cats and the number of households with domestic cats on Bruny Island has also declined over the course of this project. To assist with the project, a cat facility was established in Alona on South Bruny. This is managed by Kingborough and by 10 Lives and is affectionately known as the Cat Shack. Here, cats can be scanned for microchips, tested for temperament and rehomability, and at least 10 cats have been rehomed via 10 Lives through this. Throughout the project, the primary means of capturing cats has been cage traps, as it is across cat control programs worldwide. A rather endearing fact that I love is that in summer, our trappers switch their bait from cat food to chicken because cat food attracts more ants, and ants attract echidnas, and Bruny has an abundance of echidnas. Unlike echidnas, feral cats quickly learn to avoid traps. They become very wily and they will completely avoid the whole trapping area. Therefore, it's pretty unsurprising to hear that the majority of cats captured in this project have been unowned cats living close to human settlement. Densities of cats in these areas is generally higher, likely to easy food sources from kind-hearted humans and rubbish bins. These cats also tend to be less shy and more willing to enter traps than those living further away from settlements. Our traps are also loaned through the project to landholders who see cats on their property, and the community are encouraged to report cats through the Feral Scan app. Early on, it was really obvious, as Noel's mentioned, that a research element was required to this project, and additional methods of cat control other than just cage traps would be needed. Most cat control programs employ at least 2 to 3 methods, and so began a series of trials. Shooting at night using a thermal scope attachment proved very difficult. In the thick coastal scrub, many nights of searching resulted in very few cat sightings, and never mind, very few shots. Baiting using a cat-specific bait called Curiosity proved more promising, or it seemed to prove more promising. These baits look a bit like a sausage, but they have a poison capsule inside. In theory, quolls quite delicately chew their food, while cats are more likely to gulp theirs down. And therefore, quolls are less likely to actually eat the poison capsule. Even if they do eat it, they have a higher tolerance to the poison, called PAP, than cats. However, in our non-toxic trial, most of the baits were picked up by quolls within 5 days. It's almost like they didn't get the memo and they thought that a project named Priority Action for Eastern Quolls must mean a free feed for them. After the trial, a round of quoll trapping found no animals carrying signs of the non-toxic biomarker that had been hidden inside the bait. This suggests that perhaps the quolls had actually not ingested the capsules. But regardless, the moral of the story is that baits quickly became unavailable to cats, and therefore baiting is not a suitable option for Bruny Island. Lastly, we trialled Felix the grooming traps. These traps use lasers and AI to identify the animals passing in front of them, as Alex has already mentioned. If a cat is detected, they spray out a small amount of gel containing 1080 poison. These devices were designed to take advantage of the cat's natural instinct to groom, thereby ingesting the poison. Native animals, if accidentally sprayed, are less fastidious groomers and also, once again, have a higher tolerance to the poison than cats. In our non-toxic trial, 5 Felixes were deployed for around 5 months on Bruny Island, and the devices were set to conservative mode to reduce the possibility of a misfire. They were set out in areas where trap-shy cats were known to be. A total of 2,015 detections were recorded. 11 of these were correctly identified as cats, and no non-cats were identified as targets. I should say that with each detection, the device actually takes a photo of the animal so we can verify that it's getting the identification right. But this trial gave us the confidence to set out the Felixes in lethal mode. In this mode, the Felixes identified cats on 8 occasions and fired on 3 occasions. The other 5 records were recorded as aborted or out of range, meaning that not all the required parameters were met to initiate a firing event. This is fairly typical rate of Felixes set in conservative mode, and all up, it's a really great result. So in summary, this seems to be an excellent addition to our toolbox for cat control. There were a few other aspects to the project that I'm not going to go into tonight, including the use of GPS collars to track cat and quoll behaviour, and the use of camera traps to track cat numbers. So, what next? Our last camera trap surveys suggested that there could be as few as 10 unowned cats remaining on North Bruny Island. However, any feral animal control requires constant pressure. And we are currently setting up a new project to continue work before we lose any of the valuable ground that we have won. One thing is for sure is that cat control in populated areas is a complicated issue that requires a collaborative effort. There will always be a need for community support, for engagement, education, and collaboration between organisations. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for listening and for coming.
All right, thanks for that, Kat. It's great to hear all the positive progress that's happened on Bruny. It is really important to the success of these programs that there's a high level of community awareness, support, and involvement. So now I would like to invite all the panelists to come join me on stage, and we will start the Q&A session. So please welcome back Alex Patton, Catherine Young, and Noel Hunt. If anyone has a question in the audience, don't be shy, raise your hand. I will just get the online questions up and running. Great, over there, please.
Hi, well, thank you for the talks. I'm just wondering, because most of the feral cats were pet cats, so when does that, can stray cats become feral cats, and can we prevent that?
Great question, thank you. I might start with Alex to answer that question first.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So for most of our feral cats, these are multi-generational wild cats that have never been around people. But with our stray cats, if a cat was born a stray with some human intervention, that cat will probably be a stray its whole life. There's some potential for it to be reintegrated with people, and it's relied on human resources for at least part of its life. But if that cat moves into the wild and has babies, and then those babies have babies, and there's no human interaction at all during that time, then we would say that that's become a feral cat. There's very little genetic difference between our domestic cats and our feral cats. So yeah, they're the same species, and you wouldn't be able to tell the difference by look. There's some small exceptions, but we won't get into that. But yes, essentially your stray cats can become ferals, but it's generally the offspring that we would be more likely to coin that. It's the reason why we need consistent definitions across our legislation.
Great, thank you. I do have a question here online. Do we have any evidence of the number of feral cats in Tasmania and the change in those numbers in the last 100 years? Are the numbers increasing, decreasing, or stable? And I might throw that one back to you again, Alex.
So that's a great question.
It is
It was a part of my thesis.
I had a feeling.
Yes, it's been cut, so the paper's still in work. Essentially, it would be a great thing to know. We've talked a lot about camera traps today, and that's really our best way of figuring out where cats are and how many there are, but we can't put camera traps everywhere. So we've sampled pockets of Tasmania, and we can look at how many cats are on those cameras, and we can count the number of individuals by looking at the coat colours and patterns. But this only gives us samples. We then need to extrapolate or try to infer from that data how many cats could be elsewhere. So we are working on that. I don't have numbers for you yet, but watch this space, give me 6 months. But with that, we don't really have a way to know how many feral cats were here 100 years ago, but it would be logical to infer that the number has increased, at least since colonisation, massively across the state as they've spread and really taken advantage of the wilderness. So it's still a work in progress.
I might also throw to Kat, do you have any insight into how the feral cat population has fluctuated on Bruny over the last few decades?
I can tell you that like I mentioned, the feral cat densities around the seabird rookery at the neck were recorded as some of the highest in Tasmania. So that was, I believe, 15 cats per square kilometre, which has been massively reduced since control started. But that's a very limited example that you can't extrapolate further than that, because that's a very specific example around the food source. Do you know on Bruny that there is quite a big difference between the cats on the north of the island and on the south island? So although we do a lot of cat control on the north, there are still a huge number of cats on South Bruny as well, particularly in the wet forests, that we haven't been able to get to yet. So watch this space.
Great, thanks for that. I have another question in person. Great.
I had a property on the mainland some years ago, and it was overrun by rabbits. We used 1080 on the mainland. Does that work well, or any substitute from 1080? Does that work well on feral cats?
We were actually just having a quick chat about 1080 in the green room, so I might let Noel respond to this one, actually.
Yes, a very good question, and 10 Lives are certainly concerned about the use of 1080 today. The Felixer is currently using 1080, and with our involvement of things, we look at the greater good, and there is a problem that needs to be addressed with feral and stray cats in the bush. So the Felixer does meet part of those. Part of that challenge. It's only one tool in the toolbox, though. The Felixer isn't the great saviour, but it's certainly very valuable. But saying that the greater good is to use 1080 because the Felixer can't currently use another poison because of the viscosity issues, surely with our technology we can try a bit harder to find a more humane way of dealing with the cats. It's not the cat's fault that it's a cat, and if you've ever had to witness a cat dying with 1080, it ain't pretty and it's not humane, and we need to find another solution. We fully support the Felixer as a tool in the toolbox, but we just, at the moment, need to try a bit harder to find a more humane poison.
Yep, and I'll just add to that quickly. That's an issue we have in a lot of invasive species management, is the technology hasn't progressed very quickly, and there hasn't been a lot of pressure for governments to do so. And so we're definitely lagging a bit here in Australia, and 1080 is not really the best tool. We can do better. Yes, Alex would also like to comment on that. Sorry, this is a very interesting topic.
It's okay. I think Kat's probably thinking the same thing, though. I mean, with the 1080, that's the big controversial poison we all hear about. But Kat mentioned the curiosity baits, aptly named. Curiosity utilises a pellet of PAPP, which Kat mentioned, and that is a far more humane approach. It works by inhibiting hemoglobin in the blood, so similar to carbon monoxide poisoning, and sort of sets the animal to sleep. So it's a far more humane method, but as Noel said, we can't get it to shoot out as a gel paste yet, but we're working on it. It also rapidly decays with exposure to oxygen as well, so there's a bit to be done there, but it's not 1080. We're moving away from that as the default poison for feral cat management from the humane perspective.
I'll just make a very quick comment about that. It's not banned, but it is really strongly controlled. So it's only being allowed to be used in certain circumstances and only by certain individuals. So you have to have there's quite strict permitting on who's allowed to use it and how. So it's definitely, highly controlled. There are a lot of other non-poison options that we have as well that are being explored too. We're not, in Tasmania, we don't have all the same options that they have on mainland Australia, so we're not allowed to use leg hold traps because of, all of the amazing native mammals that we have make that really difficult. But there are other things that I think would be very interesting to explore, like the use of thermal drones which has been successful elsewhere as well.
Great, thank you everyone for that. We'll move on to the next question.
Yes, thank you. My question reflects the different management tactics of my neighbours in managing their cats. I have one neighbour who has a very sophisticated external cat run for his cats, and another neighbour who just or several other neighbours who let theirs run wild, including in my garden, and I grow a lot of my own food. And so I really object to finding cat faeces in my vegetable gardens. What can I legally do to discourage them from that behaviour? Thank you.
Thanks for your question. I might give this one to Noel.
The review of the Cat Management Act in 2019 fell short of mandating containment. 10 Lives were disappointed with that result. We realise it's a change and a challenge to contain cats, and if somebody's had their pet cat for 12 years and it's been an outdoor cat, it would be a bit difficult to change. It's only a little bit difficult, it's not impossible. And in fact, we've prepared with Kingborough Council and Tasmanian Conservation Trust and 10 Lives a series of videos on how to go about that. So it can be done, and I can tell you that the people that are adopting cats from us now, most of them are saying that they're going to contain their cat. The survey we did at the Midway Point project, Oriolton Lagoon, we surveyed the community and 76% said that they were now containing their cat on their own property. Now, you might be sceptical about that, but at least 76% knew the correct answer. So the challenge for you, and I feel your pain because my cat is very safely contained on my property. It does depend on what local government area you are in, but okay, so they don't have a bylaw in Hobart, but you are entitled to trap that cat on your property humanely, and you're entitled to give it back to the owner if known, if you want to, or to give it to a cat management facility like us. And I can assure you that if a cat turns up to us more than once, they soon get the idea. But there is more work to do with the education of the community and encouraging more bylaws. But the good thing, as I hopefully alluded to a bit in what I spoke about, is that we actually have all the local governments and the state government at the table talking about these challenges, and I think that we will start to see some progress on that. But I do understand your frustration.
Thanks for that. I might go to an online question next. So this is from Kate. Most of the methods you describe to reduce cat numbers rely on extermination and brutal methods of control. What sort of sterilization programs / methods are available? And I think this is probably a question everyone might have some insight to, so I might let Alex address that initially.
It's quite a heated question there, I think, the use of the word brutal. And I think we need to picture in our minds what it actually looks like to be a feral cat, if we're going to use the term brutal. Because it is a brutal life, and it's not a nice life. And you might think that it's natural, but nonetheless, the only way that a feral cat is going to die in the wild is either going to be potentially through a fight and getting an injury and getting an infection, or getting too old that they can't hunt anymore and then they starve to death. And so in that sense, a bullet is probably the kindest way that they're going to leave this earth. Poisons are definitely controversial, and like I say, moving away from 1080 is the future. And in regards to anything that's non-lethal, at least for the ferals, from that perspective, there are very few options because rehabilitation is so difficult. And if it was as simple that we could just find every den and rescue every kitten, well, we wouldn't have the issue that we have today. So I would say, unfortunately, there's not a lot we can offer for feral cats that isn't lethal control. There are more methods available for the domestics and the strays, which I'm sure Noel will allude to. I did briefly see on your screen, Tiana, somebody had already mentioned trap, neuter, release, which some people may be familiar with for stray cats, but there's a lot of controversy about that amongst feral species management and amongst cat people because it's not necessarily as humane as one would think. I mean, you're taking in a stray cat, you're neutering it, and then you're releasing it back into an environment where it faces dog attacks, cars, and no shelter or home. Is that really a humane approach just because the cat's not dying? So there's a lot of difficult questions to answer here, and it often comes to people's own moral sensibilities. So I just say, yes, it does sound brutal, but we need to think about the picture more broadly and what it actually is like to be one of these animals.
Thanks for that, Alex. Noel, did you want to add on to that at all?
The approach that we have found to work, again going back to the learnings from the Bruny Island project, is to approach the problem holistically and deal with all aspects of the problem: education, reduction of numbers, dealing with the problem cat owners, getting euthanising feral cats. No, you can't tame feral cats. And somebody's going to say, hang on, wait a moment, I saw something on TikTok where somebody tamed a feral cat. Well, I'd argue if they did that perhaps it was a stray cat that's been living wild for a little while and just needed to gain trust. So that holistic approach has shown to work at Bruny, Richmond, and we're very confident about where we're heading at Midway Point. Everything we've read, we don't support trap neuter release. There's some research being done around Australia as we speak, and the people that are doing it are very, very passionate about the concept of trap neuter release, but there's most of the research that we read doesn't actually support it. And even in the US, where trap neuter release is very high, if you talk to BirdLife USA, I think it is, they have plenty of research saying that it's not a great idea. The idea of trap neuter release, of course, is that you leave the males with a vasectomy, so they still act like a male in the region so that other males don't come in. But you've got to realise that a male cat out in living rough probably lives 5 years. So at best, you might be reducing the time before the cats come back in, or extending the time before the cats come in. So I think the holistic approach is the better approach for both dealing with the feral problem and the domestic problem and the big grey area between those two things.
Kat, did you want to add anything onto that?
Just briefly, there are a lot of councils who are coming on board with free desexing of a lot of cats. So, you mentioned that briefly earlier as well, that is coming on board now for domestic cats, which obviously helps that problem as well, short of containment. That's where we're at the moment. So yeah, people are definitely coming around to the idea of desexing cats.
Now, I do have a related, an interesting question online. So recently in Florida, they have released male mosquitoes that have been gene edited by CRISPR to only produce male heirs. Parentheses, don't ask me how. Well, don't worry, we're about to tell you. This is a slow extinction strategy. Would something like this be considered? So this question is about gene drives. And I'll just use my MC powers to make a comment first about this. So this is a strategy where you could essentially render all the males in a population sterile, and they would have this gene that they could pass on to render female sterile, and you basically stop reproducing. And for species like feral cats that reproduce very quickly and have lots of babies, this would be a great strategy because killing individual animals is a really slow and effective way of dealing with a species that has really high reproductive rates. As far as I'm aware, I think we're about 20 years away from any sort of vertebrate gene drive technology that we could actually put out in the environment. We have the added complication of pet cats. People who have cats that are not desexed might not want their cats with a sterilization gene introduced. But it is, far down in the future, it could be a tool that would be really useful for animals like cats and rabbits and mice that breed really quickly. Not so great for species like horses and deer that breed really slowly. That's my little soapbox. Would anyone else like to touch on that as well? Please, Alex.
Yeah, it's similar technologies being developed actually for the European carp, which is an invasive. Some of you might have heard of daughterless carp. One of the big setbacks though with this gene drive technology is you need to release a certain number of these animals into the population in order to spread the gene in the first place. So it's difficult to get public approval where you're going, hey, there's a pest species, we're going to release another 100. You go, okay, well, hold on. So you have that aspect to it, which also means we're then having to put aside money and facilities to breed up these cats with the gene. And that's the big roadblock they ran into with daughterless carp. But fun fact, the same group that's funding the thylacine coming back is doing that. So we actually talked about it at
fantastic
the
news.
Yeah, a little bit of that money, so we talked about it at the Western Australian Feral Cat Symposium last year. So there is definitely research in that area, but there are complications to overcome.
Great to hear. All right, back to our in-person audience.
Hi, thanks for a most fascinating evening. I'd be interested to hear what the criteria are for selecting where you put your trail cameras, and also do you use an attractant to bring the cats to the trail cameras?
Great. I might throw this question to Cat first.
I feel like this is Alex's PhD. So just briefly on Bruny, we are putting cameras along tracks mostly. Mammals are not silly. If they can walk along the track rather than through the bush, they will. So tracks tend to be a good place to put them. We do not use any attractors or lures because we want to look at the natural distribution of cats and the natural numbers rather than drawing them in artificially. And it also, it gets quite complicated once you start using lures. But yeah, that's our approach. We also, because we get a lot of data through feral scan about stray cats particularly, we use that to influence where we put cameras as well if we know there's cats in an area.
I totally agree with what Kat said. Trails are the way to go. There's some great scientific papers that show you got about 13 times the capture rate of feral cats when you're putting your trails you're putting your cameras on trails. And the benefit too is it's a nice clear area. You're less likely to get false triggers from vegetation, which I'm sure Kat's very familiar with. It's a lot of fun. And in terms of lures, there's a few reasons why you may choose to use attractants or may not. It really depends what the purpose of your survey is. If you're only going to have your trail camera in the environment for maybe 20 days, then you probably want to use some lures and maximize your detection probability. In terms of what lures you use, Parks Victoria will tell you to use KFC, but that's very expensive and there's nothing to show that it works. I've had great success with wallaby organs, tuna oil, things you can get quite cheaply around town. The only thing to be aware of is in my PhD, I found that if you use lures like tuna oil or meat in the presence of Tasmanian devils, that'll actually increase the devil activity at your camera. And then that in turn can reduce your feral cat activity at the cameras. They'll use the same area, but they'll avoid each other at those fine scales. So keep that in mind. But tracks and trails, way to go.
One of our colleagues in the biology department was doing some work on betongs, and they love truffle oil, the most expensive lures. Do we have another question in the audience? Great. Over there, please.
Hi. It was pointed out that cats figure out traps relatively quickly and can avoid them. And I asked this question knowing that you can't necessarily know what you can't see. But has there been similar behaviour seen with the felixes where cats figure out what they do and can avoid them? Or is there similar rates to traps for that?
Great question. And I'm going to let Alex talk to that first.
It's a great question. With the felixes, so this is what we know so far. I've mentioned Arid Recovery in my little talk. They're an amazing group out in South Australia where they have all these fenced exclusion zones. They've done cat eradications in some fenced areas, they haven't in others. One of the experiments they did, I don't know if the paper's out on this yet, was they had cats, they have a lot of trail cameras out, then they have their felixes out. They also had some cats that and they had cameras too, trail cameras across from their felixes so they could see what was happening. They had some cats that they had trapped and GPS collared and then released. What they found is that cats without collars were seen quite frequently in front of the felixes. The felixes were in non-lethal mode. So, the cats were walking in front of the felixes. They didn't seem bothered. But the cats that had been cage trapped and GPS collared were avoiding the felixes. You were seeing them on other trail cameras, but they were really what we call neophobic, afraid of new things in the environment. So there's some evidence there. We had a bit of a scare on 3 Hummock Island as well. There was a software update for the Felixes, and we had a little period there where they weren't targeting on any cats, and we got a bit worried that the cats had learnt to avoid them. But then the software's been updated again, and now it's targeting cats, so it was more likely an issue with the AI than a behavioural issue from the cats. So yeah, a lot of research being done in it, but it seems like if they're cats that have been exposed to people, they'll avoid them, but otherwise, not so much.
Would you like to add to that, Kat?
Yeah, I had also heard that in situations where cats seem to be avoiding the felixes, moving them 50 metres seemed to really help. So yeah, they sort of learn maybe an area is bad and maybe they don't necessarily understand why, but by moving the felixes around seem to be able to help with that.
I've got a question here for Noel from the online world. Do you think there is adequate regulatory support for cat management in Tasmania? And if not, what options can the state and Australian government implement to support dealing with the problem of unmanaged domestic cats?
So, as I said a little while ago, that it was disappointing that when the Cat Management Act in Tasmania was reviewed that it fell short of dealing with containment, even if it had phased in the containment or had a grandfather clause type arrangement so that at least we could move to that. I think there's an opportunity for us all to participate and respond to the new cat management plan that's being developed for Tasmania right as we speak, to sending your input so that the voice is heard loud and clear that times have changed and move on, and the expectation, like the good folks at Midway Point, the 76% that say that keeping the cat on their property, that really does need to be addressed. There's I still stand by what I said earlier on, that I'm very optimistic that we have moved so far in the last 10 years, and I think the rate of that will actually get moving and we will start to see some very definite changes, along with all those things of hopefully the next generation of cat owners of experienced educat and far more environmentally aware, and hopefully that we will improve. So it is being talked about. It's great to send your feedback when you get the opportunity on state plans and local government activity, so that it's clear that things have changed.
Great, thanks. And one more question in the audience.
Yes. I love that program you mentioned on Bruny Island where you had the men's shed involved in helping build the catteries for people and like encouraging owners to keep their cats contained that way. Is there anything happening on the larger island of Tasmania that's continuing that or expanding on that?
That's for you, Kat.
Yeah. It's not that I know of, because Kingborough Council is so engaged in cat management. They were really driving that. They saw a need. One of the biggest problems for people complying with their bylaw fully was containment. And so they, embarked on a mission to see how they could help fix that, essentially. Whereas the other councils in Tasmania don't have the bylaw restrictions, so there's not necessarily the incentive to implement a project like that. Men's sheds all over Tasmania do amazing community projects that nobody ever hears about. So perhaps there is something going on elsewhere that I'm not aware of. Noel, are you aware of anything like that happening?
So obviously you can pop into 10 Lives into our store and all proceeds go to a very important cat management facility. So there are things that you can buy, but the Tassie Cat is the brand name for the 3 state cat management coordinators funded by the state government. The southern one is hosted within 10 Lives, and they have a project where they've put together a lot of information on the low-cost options for containing your cat, so that tricks like enclosing a veranda or things like things of that nature. So there are innovative and cost-effective ways of doing it, or you can just go and buy some good gear and get someone to set it up for you if you can't be bothered. And I did mention before, there's a great series of videos that actually teach you about dealing with an older cat and changing the habits and setting up the enrichment that they need to be very comfortable in a different environment.
Great, thank you for that. This is obviously a very interesting topic because we have 17 unanswered questions online, and I'm sure there's more in the audience. But I would like the last question to be, if you could have the audience have one takeaway from this talk, what would it be? And we'll start at the end this time. Cat?
Oh, I think I got away easy there by starting off, because I think it might be a bit of consensus here that cat containment. Cat containment is of domestic cats is really the way to go. If we have all domestic cats contained to properties, then it's easier for us to deal with feral and stray cats. Also, microchipping is very important. These are basic things that are socially accepted as strategies for dealing with dogs. Everyone's dogs are expected to be contained to their properties and microchipped. So extending that to cats. It's my take-home message.
Great, thanks. No?
I think that if we all get involved and take the opportunity of speaking up at the appropriate time, and if you've got a problem with your council, just report it to them. Talk to your local cat management facility. We can't solve every problem because of all those raffle tickets we have to sell. But if you talk to us, we can work together, and I think the working together aspect is really where we can get things to happen, so that we can have all those things done: containment, desexing, microchipping. Responsible cat ownership will go a long way to solving some of our problems.
I think it can be difficult looking at large-scale ecological disasters such as this, and it can be quite overwhelming as a member of the public when you feel like, gosh, what can we actually do about this? Is there anything that can be done? And it can almost feel a little bit hopeless. I think that everything that Noel and Kat has talked about is so important in trying to take our vision and bringing it closer to home and looking at what we can do today. And hoping that everybody here, as informed and engaged members of the public, can trust in us scientists that we are developing technology, hopefully, to deal with feral cats at a larger scale. But in the meantime, there is so much to be done on a smaller scale by controlling our domestic cats and limiting our impact at home, and then by creating these safe havens on our island. So at least we have these sort of arcs to tide us over while we deal with the problem at a larger scale. I think that would be my take home.
Those are all excellent take-homes, and I'll just add briefly to that, like, don't be afraid to write your state and federal representatives, because they do actually listen. So the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So. And that ends the procession for the evening. Please join me in thanking, and thank me. Please join me in thanking Alex, Kat, and Noel for a really great discussion. Thank you. A really, really important topic and some really good key takeaways that everyone can support for a better Tasmania. Thank you.